most of the stuff I do as a startup founder is pretty exciting. I get to talk to customers and build cool new products and see how these products impact their lives. But this part of being a startup founder really sucks. It's arriving in the UK for only the second time in your life, only to find yourself in quarantine for 5 days where you can't leave and you have to stay in the same Airbnb locked down for 5 full straight days. So finding investors is tough. It's emotionally draining, it's time demanding, mostly draining because as a founder, you're pitching your life's work in the end, and you're gonna be rejected most of the time. So speaking of this inevitability, while in my quarantine, let me tell you everything I know about finding investors. Cue the intro stuff. So in case you were wondering, by the way, the reason why I'm here in the UK is Anyway, the process of finding investors is really a game of connections. And there's this little diagram that I'm gonna draw over here showing kind of like my step-by-step or like the hierarchy that you have to follow when trying to look for investors. Because number one, you want to go to people that you know, and that's gonna be your step one and your step two. A lot of founders I come across that just go and start pitching investors, just external investors, trying to find investors online. Friends, family, and fools is really an underrated category and one that I think many founders just overlook. And I sort of get why. And I'll tell you my own case. I'm Costa Rican, even though my dad is a little bit of a small celebrity in Costa Rica. I didn't grow up with money. My family doesn't have any money, and I don't have a lot of friends with money. So where would you get someone to fund your startup? In Costa Rica, $500,000 is a shit ton of money, as in many parts of the world. But still, I was able to raise some friends and family capital, some pre-seed money, idea stage in Costa Rica. So this to me is sort of like the proof that it's not impossible, it's just hard. And you have to sort of think outside the box a little bit and start building a network for yourself. And when you go looking for investors, when you go looking for stranger investors, it is a bit of a red flag that you have not been able to raise any money from people that you know. Because they will expect you to have really depleted that option before going to them. And I really can't count the number of companies that are just at the cold email stage and they haven't even visited this first friends and family part. Another fact here is that if you're building a software company in 2021, the truth is you really don't need a lot of money to get started. You don't need to pay for servers, you don't need to pay for your email system. You can just buy Intercom and use AWS to build a very basic product. You can even do it with no code tools now. So in this day and age, you and your team, you should be able to build a very basic MVP with under, say, $100,000. It's not that hard. Yes, of course, you would have to take below market salaries to do it. Yes, of course, $100,000 is not enough to hire a development agency to do it for you, but that's not the case. You need to build it yourself. Same with marketing. You're doing all this stuff yourself instead of hiring agencies. So this friends and family round, it's not $500,000. It's maybe 100 or 200, and it's of course made of smaller checks. I'm talking 10, 20, 30, maybe even $50,000 checks, but it's a bunch of people that join in and they're investing in this company not because they believe in the idea, definitely not because of your traction, because you don't have any. They're investing in this company because they believe in you. And that's why it's so important that you start with a network of people that know and trust you to build this. So the line over what a seed round is has gotten overall blurry over the last few years. Normally, a seed round is the first round of real money that you raise, right? May that be $500,000 or $2 million. My friend Devrim from Superpeer, their seed round was a $2 million round, which in a different world you would call a pre-seed round because they raised this before they had a product. And this is of course an exception because Devrim had a fantastic network that he could raise money from.
We didn't have the intention of raising. Even the second round came to us. I didn't need to build a deck for it.
The point is that anytime you want to raise money and that number is above $500,000, you are probably going to have to go to external investors for it. It's no longer something that you can raise with friends and family, for the most of us. But you can definitely find a way to get them in your network. And that I think is still key. How, as a founder, can you get connected to these investors early on? For me, two things that we did were key to this. First, it was the time that I lived in New York and the time that I lived in the Bay Area. Why? Because I come from the outside. I'm from Costa Rica. So just being in those cities inevitably builds you a network of CEOs, of other founders, and a little bit of investors just through that. So that's one. And then number two is accelerators. Startup accelerators are this fantastic bridge that companies can use to sort of bridge their way or have a soft landing when they arrive in a city. And that applies if you grew up outside of these major startup hubs or if you're outside the US. 75% of our YouTube audience are founders that are outside of the US. So if you intend to start a company there, then an accelerator could be a very good option. And you could debate a lot about, the equity they take and whether it's worth it. But if you need that as a bridge, I think it's very much worth it. It's paid off for us. Steve Barsh I met in Dream It when we did that, and look where it's gotten us. The accelerator time is this fantastic time in a company when you're gonna kind of be surrounded by other smart people, by other smart founders. You're gonna pool all-nighters together. But also the investors and the partners on the accelerator, you're gonna get to ask intros from them as much as you want. Like from a normal relationship, you can ask them to do an intro maybe once or twice a month. But when you're in an accelerator, you can request intros from the partners 5 times a week. That's what I used to do. The point here is that these relationships pay off. They pay off in a very tangible, very measurable ROI. You can get money, meaning funding, out of the relationships that you build through your startup career. And there's no way to fast track this, by the way. Even today, that as a company, Slidebean, we're not really raising money. We are profitable and we've been profitable for a little bit. We're not raising money. We might raise money in the future. I will probably start new companies in the future. So I want to build those relationships. I don't want to waste time, because when you are in a hurry, when you're in an urgency to build these relationships, it's already too late. If you need to raise money in 2 months and you don't have the relationships to ask for money, you're already too late. So even today, I dedicate some of my time to talking to these investors. Some of them reach out because they come across our content or our channel or whatever CRM they use. Slidebean is popping up. So I'll take those calls, I'll build those relationships. But if you're not getting any of that yet, we built a couple of tools that might be useful for you. So first is our investor finder, which automatically crawls the web to find investors that match your investment criteria. And we have that available. You can go to slidebean.com/investor finder to try it out. But new, and this we're launching with this video, is a new tool to find accelerators. So if you're earlier stage than investors, which many of our listeners and watchers are, this accelerator tool is very, very useful. What it lets you do is you're gonna be able to find accelerators in your space and in your area, and you're gonna be able to filter them by investment focus, stage focus, but more importantly, when their deadlines are coming. So you'll be able to find accelerators that are closing their application deadlines in the next coming week, so you can get your stuff ready, hopefully with a Slidebean pitch deck. So it's day 2, which is a little bit of a highlight because we get to take our COVID tests today.
Into your nostril until you feel resistance. This is usually the last
So the last point I'll make on navigating your network section is your investors might introduce you to other people that they know that might invest as well. I'd say at least 20% of our round came from introductions from people who had already put money in the company. But you can also ask them to do so. They can start it themselves, but you can ask them to do so. Devrim, for example, saw most of his round happen from just investors kind of just on their own, kind of going and helping him raise the round in many ways. But when you want to request an intro, it's not that big of a deal. Step 1, what you want to do is find the investor that you want to connect with and find a reason, a good excuse for you to connect with them. You can do that through AngelList, you can do that through our investor finder. So step 2 is you want to go on LinkedIn and find out which of these people have a second level degree connection to you. It's a very tiring and very boring task, but just find out who you're connected with and find out, of course, who can make an intro. Step 3, find an angle. It's not just, hey, I want an intro to this investor because they have money or because they invest in startups. No, find maybe a company that they invested that it's similar, maybe an industry that they're interested in, but don't just send a request for an intro just randomly. Make sure that there's an angle to it. And then 4, send an email to your contact requesting the intro. Bonus points if you add a blurb at the end of the email so they can just forward that email to the investor instead of having to write one of their own. Again, have some touch on these emails. People are busy and they generally don't have time to, you're asking them for a favor, right? So just have some touch of it. Don't abuse your power to request introductions. Some don'ts, and I get a little bit of this already. First, don't say, hey, do you know any investors in our space that you can introduce? We don't have a database in our heads of people that we can introduce to you. Just find someone specific ask for that intro. Again, don't abuse this power. 1-2 intro requests per month I think is reasonable. I used to do 5 a week to the DreamIt partners, but that was when we were part of the Accelerator. Aside from that time, you just can't abuse it so much. And very important, do not send a deck in advance. This is a rookie mistake. You first ask for permission to send a deck. You first ask if they'd be interested in seeing your deck, and then if they say yes, you send your pitch deck. Every single one of the investors that invested in Slidebean came through one of these 3 methods. In general, connections and network. Any method below this one that I'm going to talk about in the next few days, I've gotten into some advanced conversations through those, but I've not been able to raise money from either. And as you've probably seen, this kind of becomes a tedious task, right? It's a time-demanding task, and this is why I say that founders, and the CEO especially, needs to carve out time to raise money. It's not a side task that you do. You actually need to carve out 3-4 months of your time, which endangers the company, right? You need to decide when in your company's timeline is the best time to raise money, because your company is going to be running without a CEO for a little bit. To aid a little bit of how tedious this task might be, we have created the Investor Finder, which essentially takes care of the crawling part of this process. But then again, if you've tried this, if you've been at it for weeks and months, hopefully, before you give up, then you can move to the next step, which is conferences and events. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So I guess the first disclaimer with conferences and events is that none of my investors came from conferences or any of the options below this one. All of my investors I met with the options above. It's not impossible. I've seen it happen. I've seen companies raise money. Pete from Jackpocket met his first investor at South by Southwest, but it wasn't kind of the conventional meet and greet table. And I've been to a fair share of conferences. I made a video about it. I'm going to SaaStr in September in San Francisco if anybody's going to be in town. But my general feeling with conferences is that I'm a bit of an introvert in these settings. Like, I'm not the one that goes chasing people to start conversations. I've seen people who are, and they definitely get much more value out of them than me. And in my experience and what I've heard, like, the chance to meet investors in conferences generally revolves around you just talking to random people and just getting to meet them. It doesn't happen in these kind of investor meet and greet tables, or they're not stopping by your booth and kind of funding your company because of that. That's not usually the way that happens. I feel that these relationships mostly happen randomly at the conference or on the after parties and happy hours. What you definitely don't want to do, and I've seen it done, is people kind of go through the list of attendees to the conference and they look for an investor, usually like a famous-ish celebrity investor that they want to pitch, and they chase them around all the conference, or they're waiting for him to get off stage. I've seen that happen. It looks kind of pathetic, and I don't think it kind of leads to any success, as far as I've seen. So today is hopefully the last day in this Airbnb. We actually got out to see the world to get our test to release test. If that comes negative, we should be able to get out. Let's talk about these angel groups. Some angel groups and some smaller venture funds, especially for the early stage, will let you apply. They'll have an apply form on their website. And they generally work. I didn't end up raising money from any of them, but I did get replies and I did get some activity and meetings with these funds that, again, accept pitch decks. They're not the Sequoias, they're not the famous Andreessen Horowitz funds. They already have a huge pipeline of deals, and you need an intro to get to them. I'm going to make it a task to ensure that our accelerator list, the one I mentioned before, also includes a list of the funds that allow these applications. So after being locked in for 5 days, we are finally free. So the advantage with the Twitter for Startups world is that it's a small, close-knit community. This approach could apply to Twitter or some communities like Clubhouse. And a lot of investors are constantly generating content. They're doing threads and doing replies, and many even have DMs open so you can pitch them directly through Twitter. And that is your way in, really. It's about commenting, it's about reacting to what they're saying, it's about getting in on these threads. And it took me years to force a habit on Twitter. I wasn't a big fan of Twitter at first, but I truly forced the habit on myself by just deciding to spend some time on Twitter every single day. Now that I've learned to appreciate it, I do see the value in the network that it can provide, something that's very different that you don't see across other social networks. It's where I'm most active, by the way, so if you ever want to ask me something, Twitter is probably where you're going to get a reply first. Again, what you don't want to do is just cold pitch people. You want to warm up that lead first. Again, create a small little Twitter relationship with them for a few weeks or maybe months before you actually pitch that investor. And a lot of founders get that wrong. They just go and cold pitch just like it's a cold email. So don't get me wrong, meeting investors through Twitter could mean weeks or months of work, but it is better than nothing. Small commercial before I go to cold emails. Our weekly newsletter has a section called the Twitter Thread of the Week, which is a good way to kind of get a head start on what everybody's talking about in the startup world. But finally, let's go to cold emails. And again, this is an absolute last resort. If you should have been working for weeks or months in the other options before you go to cold emails. But if you absolutely have to, here are some tips to get a head start. So first, you want to do warm intros, warm emails to them. So you want to research what they're doing, research the companies they're investing, and write something that sort of relates, that shows that you've done some homework and that there is a valid reason to contact them. Make it as personal as possible and never ever send email blasts, and always ask for permission to send your deck first. So don't just send your deck out to people. Another common mistake I see is founders reaching out to investors who have invested in their competitors. They're not going to invest in a company that directly competes against one of their portfolio companies, and worse for you, they might share information from your deck with the founder of your competitor company. It happens to me. I've gotten some insider details from pitch decks that founders have shared with my investors on companies that compete with us. Another option when cold emailing an investor is to use an older company as leverage, either by mentioning that you're a fan of that company and even reaching out to the founder of that company. Like, we founders, we're busy people, but we try to be as nice as possible and help as much as possible to our fellow founders, because we know the struggle. So if you have a good relationship with another founder, if you start to establish that just by reaching out to that founder, asking them about an investor, there's a chance that you can have a warm intro to that investor eventually. You can also use one of their previous investments as leverage. Just show that you did your homework, talk about that company, why you understand it or why you like it, and just make that email more personal. Also, acknowledge that you're sending a cold outreach. It's not nice to receive a cold email. Most of the times, they won't reply. So just acknowledge the fact that this is an awkward situation, apologize first, and just tell them that you had no other route to contact them. I think that goes a long way. And like I said, while this option looks easier, it is less successful than any of the other 6 that we talked about today. So go and try those first before you cold email investors. Hope this was useful. Make sure you hit that subscribe, and we'll see you next week.